A boat traveling upriver into darkness. The smell of napalm. Marlon Brando emerging from shadows. In 1979, Francis Ford Coppola delivered a war film unlike anything audiences had seen before. The production nearly destroyed him, drove the cast to their limits, and created a film that people are still trying to understand decades later. These are 15 shocking behind-the-scenes secrets from Apocalypse Now. Number 15. The production lasted 238 days. It ended up taking 238 days, stretching over more than a year. The production spiraled out of control almost from the beginning. Francis Ford Coppola had just come off the Godfather films and had enormous credibility in Hollywood. He convinced United Artists to finance his vision of adapting Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness to the Vietnam War. The studio gave him creative control and the budget he requested, trusting his track record. What they didn't anticipate was that Coppola would essentially lose control of the production. Filming in the Philippines presented constant challenges. The weather was unpredictable, with typhoons destroying sets. The Philippine military, which had provided helicopters and equipment, would suddenly recall them for actual military operations, leaving the production without crucial resources. Coppola kept rewriting the script during filming, sometimes finishing pages the morning they were to be shot. Actors never knew what they'd be doing from day to day. The lack of a solid plan meant scenes were shot, reshot, and sometimes abandoned entirely. The extended production time ballooned the budget from the initial $12 million to over $30 million. Coppola personally guaranteed much of the financing, putting his own money and property on the line. If the film failed, he would be financially ruined. Number 14. Martin Sheen had a heart attack. During filming, Martin Sheen was only 36 years old when he suffered a serious heart attack in the Philippine jungle. He nearly died, and the production had to shut down while he recovered. Sheen had been under enormous physical and psychological stress. The heat and humidity were brutal. He'd been drinking heavily, partly to cope with the difficult conditions, and partly because his character was meant to be spiraling into darkness. The line between Sheen and Captain Willard became dangerously blurred. The heart attack happened in the middle of the night. Sheen crawled on his hands and knees for help, unable to stand. He was convinced he was dying. A local doctor treated him initially, and then he was evacuated to Manila for proper medical care. Coppola faced a choice. He could shut down the production entirely, which would probably mean the film never got finished. Or he could wait for Sheen to recover and hope he'd be able to continue. Coppola chose to wait, keeping the production in a holding pattern for weeks. Sheen's brother, Joe Estevez, was brought in to shoot some over-the-shoulder shots and distance shots while Martin recovered. The production covered up the severity of the situation, claiming Sheen had heat exhaustion rather than a heart attack. They didn't want the studio to panic and pull the plug. When Sheen returned to filming, he was still weak and recovering. But he pushed himself to finish the role, giving one of the most intense performances of his career while dealing with the aftermath of a major health crisis. Number 13. Harvey Keitel was fired and replaced. Martin Sheen wasn't originally cast as Captain Willard. Harvey Keitel started the role, filmed for several weeks, and then was fired by Coppola. Keitel approached the character differently than Coppola wanted. Keitel played Willard as more conventionally tough, a soldier doing a job. Coppola wanted someone who could portray the psychological dissolution that happens when you go too far into darkness. Keitel's performance was professional, but wrong for the vision Coppola had developed. After watching the footage, Coppola made the difficult decision to replace his lead actor several weeks into production. This meant reshooting everything they'd already done with Keitel, adding time and cost to a production that was already struggling. Martin Sheen was brought in as a replacement. Sheen had a quality of vulnerability and barely contained intensity that fit what Coppola needed. Sheen could play a man coming apart at the seams, which is what the journey upriver demanded. The decision to replace Keitel was artistically correct, but logistically disastrous. It meant starting over, and it signaled to the cast and crew that nothing about this production was certain or safe. Number 12. Marlon Brando showed up overweight and unprepared. Marlon Brando was paid $3.5 million for about 3 weeks of work playing Colonel Kurtz. He arrived in the Philippines overweight, having not read Heart of Darkness or the script, and with his own ideas about how the character should be played. Brando weighed close to 300 pounds, which made him difficult to photograph. Coppola had envisioned Kurtz as a lean, hungry figure, someone consumed by his own vision. Instead, he got an actor who looked more like a Buddha than a warrior. Coppola had to completely rethink how to shoot Brando. He kept him in shadows, used close-ups of his face, and dressed him in dark clothing to minimize his size. The decision to keep Kurtz in darkness became an artistic choice that worked for the character, but it originated from necessity. Brando also hadn't bothered to read the source material. Coppola spent days with Brando discussing Conrad's novel and the themes of the film. Brando would improvise philosophical monologues, and Coppola would film them, hoping to find something usable. The collaboration was frustrating, but productive. Brando's improvisations gave Kurtz a mesmerizing quality. The character became more abstract and mythological, which actually served the film's descent into madness. But getting there required Coppola to abandon his original plan and work with what Brando gave him. Number 11. Dennis Hopper was using drugs. Throughout filming, Dennis Hopper played the photojournalist, a manic character who's fallen under Kurtz's spell. Hopper's performance is wild and unpredictable, and much of that came from the fact that he was using various substances throughout filming. Hopper had recently gotten sober before production started, but he relapsed during the shoot. The isolation, the stress, and the general chaos of the production contributed to his return to old habits. He would show up to set high and improvise rambling monologues. Coppola recognized that Hopper's instability actually worked for the character. The photojournalist is supposed to be unhinged, a man who's lost his grip on reality. Hopper's genuine disorientation made the performance authentic in a disturbing way. Hopper's scenes with Brando were particularly chaotic because neither actor was following the script. They would improvise off each other, with Coppola filming everything and hoping to find moments he could use. The process was maddening, but occasionally brilliant. Number 10. The opening hotel room scene was real. The famous opening sequence where Martin Sheen's character destroys a hotel room was shot with Sheen actually drunk. The breakdown you see on screen was real. It was Sheen's first day of filming after replacing Keitel. Coppola wanted to capture Willard at his lowest point, drunk and violent and falling apart. Sheen decided the best way to play it was to actually get drunk. During the scene, Sheen punched a mirror and severely cut his hand. The blood you see is real. Sheen kept performing, smearing blood on his face and the mirror. Coppola kept the cameras rolling. Sheen later said the scene was one of the most difficult and personal moments of his career. He wasn't just acting, he was exposing real pain and real self-destruction. The vulnerability in that scene set the tone for everything that followed. Number 9. A typhoon destroyed most of the sets. In May 1976, Typhoon Olga hit the Philippines and destroyed most of the production sets. Months of construction work was wiped out in a single storm. The massive village set that had been built for the film's climactic scenes was completely destroyed. Helicopters were damaged. Equipment was ruined. The production had to shut down while sets were rebuilt from scratch. The typhoon cost the production months of time and millions of dollars. Insurance covered some of the damage, but not all. Coppola had to secure additional financing to continue. The delay gave Coppola time to rethink elements of the film, but it also meant the cast and crew were stuck in the Philippines for much longer than anticipated. The extended timeline contributed to the physical and mental exhaustion that plagued the production. Number 8. There were real dead bodies on set. The climactic temple scenes featured real human corpses that had been purchased from a grave robber. The production needed bodies for the disturbing imagery of Kurtz's compound, and someone on the crew arranged to acquire actual cadavers. When the Philippine government discovered what had happened, there was a scandal. The production had to explain how they'd come into possession of dead bodies, and the crew member responsible for acquiring them faced legal trouble. The incident exemplified how out of control the production had become. In the pursuit of authenticity and impact, basic boundaries had been crossed. The film was consuming everyone involved, and ethical considerations sometimes got lost in the chaos. Number 7. Francis Ford Coppola had a nervous breakdown. The stress of the endless production pushed Coppola to a breaking point. He suffered what he later described as a nervous breakdown, telling his wife Eleanor that he wanted to end his life. Coppola was dealing with impossible pressure. The film was over budget and behind schedule. The studio was losing confidence. He'd mortgaged his personal assets to keep production going. The script wasn't working, and he was rewriting daily while trying to maintain some kind of narrative coherence. Eleanor Coppola documented much of the production in her notes and recordings, which later became the documentary Hearts of Darkness, A Filmmaker's Apocalypse. Her footage shows Francis at his lowest moments, questioning everything and wondering if the film would destroy him. Coppola eventually stabilized enough to continue, but the experience marked him. He later compared making Apocalypse Now to the Vietnam War itself, an endeavor that spiraled beyond anyone's control and left everyone involved damaged. Number 6. The film didn't have a proper ending. Coppola struggled with how to end the film throughout production and even during editing. He shot multiple versions of the ending and tested different approaches. One version had the temple exploding in an airstrike, a massive spectacle that would have provided a conventional climax. Coppola shot the destruction, but ultimately decided it was too Hollywood, too neat an ending for a film about the impossibility of resolution. The final version ends with Willard completing his mission and then leaving Kurtz's compound, his face emerging from darkness. It's ambiguous and unsettling, leaving audiences without clear answers about what Willard has become or what anything meant. Even in the theatrical release, Coppola wasn't fully satisfied with the ending. He continued to tinker with it in later cuts, including Redux and Final Cut versions, that added back-deleted scenes and altered the film's rhythm. Number 5. The helicopter attack scene used real Philippine military equipment. The famous helicopter attack sequence, set to Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, was filmed using actual Philippine military helicopters and pilots. The Philippine government provided the equipment as part of their cooperation with the production. The coordination required was enormous. Multiple helicopters had to fly in formation, while cameras mounted in other helicopters captured the action. The pilots were military professionals, but they were performing for a movie, which created unique challenges. The scene required dozens of takes over multiple days. The logistics of getting all the helicopters in the air at the same time, flying the correct patterns, and capturing usable footage was staggeringly complex. During filming, some of the helicopters would suddenly peel away and leave. The Philippine military was fighting an actual insurgency, and when they received calls about rebel activity, they'd recall their helicopters immediately. The production would have to halt mid-scene and wait for the military situation to resolve before continuing. The sequence became one of the most iconic scenes in cinema history. The juxtaposition of classical music with modern warfare, the exhilaration mixed with horror, perfectly captured the film's themes about the madness of war. Number 4. Lawrence Fishburne lied about his age. Lawrence Fishburne played Clean, a young soldier on the boat crew. He was only 14 years old when filming began, though he'd lied about his age to get the role. Fishburne told the production he was 17. By the time anyone discovered the truth, he was already cast and filming had started. The production decided to keep him because he was good in the role, and replacing him would mean more delays. The extended production meant Fishburne spent years of his teenage life in the Philippines making this film. He grew up on set, maturing from a boy into a young man during the chaotic shoot. The experience shaped Fishburne's approach to acting. He learned from watching Brando, Sheen, and the other professionals work. He experienced a level of intensity and commitment that would inform his entire career. Number 3. The Kurtz compound was built in the jungle. The massive temple compound where Kurtz rules was built from scratch in the Philippine jungle. The production constructed an entire village with authentic-looking stone structures and decorations. The set had to look ancient and decayed, as if it had been there for centuries. The art department used various techniques to age everything artificially, creating the impression of a place time had forgotten. Building in the jungle presented constant challenges. The heat and humidity affected materials. The remote location made transporting supplies difficult. The construction took months and employed hundreds of local workers. The set was so elaborate and convincing that it became a character in itself. The visual impact of the compound, with its statues and shadows and sense of dread, communicated Kurtz's madness without dialogue. Number 2. The sound design was revolutionary. Walter Murch's sound design for Apocalypse Now was groundbreaking and helped earn the Film Technical Academy Awards. Murch created a dense, layered soundscape that immersed audiences in the experience of Vietnam. The film was one of the first to use a surround sound mix in theaters. Murch placed sounds all around the audience, making them feel like they were in the jungle, on the river, inside the madness. The opening scene layers helicopter sounds over Jim Morrison's voice, creating an immediate sense of disorientation. Throughout the film, sound fades in and out of consciousness, mimicking Willard's mental state. Murch worked on the sound for over a year in post-production. He treated sound as equal to image, building atmosphere and emotion through what audiences heard as much as what they saw. Number 1. The film premiered incomplete at Cannes. Apocalypse Now premiered at the 1979 Cannes Film Festival, but Coppola was still editing. He submitted a version clearly labeled as a work in progress because he couldn't finish in time for the festival deadline. Coppola projected the film for the jury and audiences knowing it wasn't done. Some scenes had temporary sound mixing. The ending was still being figured out. But he needed to show something after years of production and mounting pressure from the studio and investors. The Cannes screening was both a triumph and a source of anxiety. Coppola stood before the audience and essentially confessed that what they were about to watch was incomplete. He asked them to judge it as a work in progress, to see past the rough edges to what the film was trying to achieve. The reception was mixed. Some people recognized they were seeing a masterpiece in formation. Critics like Roger Ebert understood the ambition and scope of what Coppola had attempted. Others were confused by the incomplete nature of what they watched and frustrated that they couldn't evaluate a finished product. The film shared the Palme d'Or with The Tin Drum, an unusual compromise that reflected the divided opinions among the jury. Some members wanted to give Apocalypse Now the award outright despite its unfinished state. Others felt uncomfortable rewarding an incomplete film. The shared prize was a diplomatic solution. The Cannes premiere generated enormous publicity. The fact that Coppola had shown an unfinished film at one of the world's most prestigious festivals became part of the mythology surrounding the production. It reinforced the narrative that this was a film that had pushed everyone involved beyond normal limits. Coppola continued working on the film after Cannes, completing it for theatrical release in August 1979. He refined the sound mix, finalized the color timing, and made his final decisions about the ending. The theatrical version was cleaner and more polished than what Cannes audiences had seen, but it retained the essential chaos and ambiguity that defined the film. Even the theatrical release wasn't the end of Coppola's tinkering. In 2001, he released Apocalypse Now Redux, which added 49 minutes of previously cut footage. This version included the French plantation sequence, additional character development, and extended scenes throughout. Some critics felt Redux improved the film by adding context and depth. Others argued it disrupted the pacing and diluted the nightmare quality of the theatrical cut. In 2019, for the film's 40th anniversary, Coppola released yet another version called Final Cut. This version ran between the theatrical and Redux versions in length, restoring some material while cutting other scenes that Coppola decided didn't work. Even 4 decades after the original release, Coppola was still searching for the definitive version of his film. The multiple versions of Apocalypse Now reflect Coppola's ongoing struggle with the material. He'd spent so long living with the film, pouring so much of himself into it, that he could never quite let it go. Each new version was another attempt to fully realize the vision that had driven him into the Philippine jungle and nearly destroyed him. Apocalypse now stands as one of cinema's greatest achievements and one of its most troubled productions. The film captured something essential about war and madness precisely because its creation mirrored its subject. Coppola went into the heart of darkness to make a film about the heart of darkness, and he barely made it back. If you enjoyed these behind-the-scenes secrets from Apocalypse Now, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into classic films. What's your favorite moment from Apocalypse Now? Let me know in the comments.